The warmth of the Prescott family's Aspen mansion was supposed to feel welcoming, but it hit me like a physical blow the moment I stumbled through the door. Outside, a blizzard was raging, a furious, white-knuckled storm that had turned a 2-hour drive into a 4-hour test of will. But the real storm, I quickly learned, wasn't the one howling through the Colorado mountains. It was the one brewing in the icy blue eyes of my daughter-in-law. My son's wife, Jessica, and her obscenely wealthy family despised me. Not for anything I had done, but for what I represented, a simpler, poorer life they had long since shed like a snakeskin. On my way to their annual Christmas party, a command performance I dreaded for months, I'd stopped to help an old woman stranded in the snow. Because of it, I arrived late, my hair plastered to my scalp with melted snow, my old wool dress, my humiliating backup dress, stained with road slush and a smudge of grease. Jessica's perfectly painted lips, the color of blood, curled into a sneer of pure disgust. "We'd prefer if you left," she hissed, her voice a sliver of ice in the festive, champagne-scented air. Just as I was about to turn and flee, the very woman I'd rescued from that blizzard walked in. And who she turned out to be didn't just change the party, it changed my entire life. If you're watching this, I hope you'll stick with me to hear how a simple act of kindness in a storm could unleash such a tempest in a rich family's gilded cage. Before I get into the heart of it, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know your city, your country, and what time it is where you are. It's a comfort to know we're all connected, sharing stories across the miles. Now, let me take you back to how a 64-year-old retired nurse from a town you've never heard of ended up being publicly shamed at the most exclusive Christmas party in Aspen. It all started with that whisper, those 5 little words. "We'd prefer if you left." They weren't shouted. Shouting would have been a scene, and the Prescotts hated scenes. This was worse. This was quiet, controlled, and surgically precise, designed to cut me to the bone without rattling the crystal. Jessica stood before me, a vision in an emerald silk dress that shimmered under the light of a chandelier the size of my car. Her blonde hair was swept into an elaborate style that looked like it had taken hours, a fortress of perfection with not a single strand out of place. She looked untouchable. And I looked like what I was. A woman who had just spent an hour on her knees in a snowbank on the side of a mountain road, my fingers numb wrestling with a loose battery cable on a stranger's car. My hands were raw and red from the cold, the knuckles chapped and angry. I tried to hide them behind my back. My practical winter boots, the sturdy, waterproof ones my late husband Frank had insisted I buy years ago, were leaving a trail of damp, dirty circles on a pristine marble floor that looked like polished milt. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me, her friends, all of them impossibly thin and tanned in the middle of winter, glittering with diamonds that caught the light. They weren't just looking, they were dissecting me. Their gazes were scalpels, peeling back the layers of my cheap coat and worn dress to expose the truth. I did not belong. My cheeks burned with a shame so hot and fierce it almost dried the melting snow on my face. This was their world, a world of polished surfaces, polite fictions, and effortless elegance. And I, Carol Peterson, had just tracked the messy, inconvenient, and very real world right into the middle of their perfect Christmas fantasy. I tried desperately to catch the eye of my son, Michael, who was standing a few feet away, trapped. He was a ghost at the feast, caught between his wife's rigid posture and my disheveled, dripping presence. He looked pale, his expression a painful, gut-wrenching mix of pity and acute embarrassment. He wouldn't meet my gaze. In that moment, surrounded by strangers, the deepest cut was the loneliness. What could I possibly say to defend myself when my very appearance had already declared me guilty of the unforgivable crime of being poor? To understand the absolute chill in that grand foyer, you have to understand the 3 years of creeping frost that came before it. I'm Carol Peterson. For 40 years, I was a registered nurse. I worked night shifts, held the hands of the dying, and celebrated with the families of the newborn. I raised a good son, I buried a good husband, and I settled into a quiet retirement in a small Colorado town that the Prescotts probably couldn't find on a map. My life is lived on a modest pension and Social Security. It's a life of careful budgets, of using coupons at the grocery store, of mending clothes instead of replacing them, and finding a deep, abiding joy in the simple things like the first tomato from my small garden. It's a good life, a full life, a real life. But in the rarefied air of the Prescott family, my reality was their shame. My son, Michael, met Jessica during his medical residency in Denver. He was brilliant and kind. The best parts of his father, Frank, come to life again. He had his father's steady hands and his compassionate heart. Jessica was ambitious. She was a force of nature, driven and focused, and she had set her sights on my son. Her family, the Prescotts, were practically Aspen royalty. Their wealth wasn't the loud, flashy kind you see on TV. It was the old, quiet, heavy kind that came with generations of inherited power and social standing. Prescott Enterprises was a name that opened every door in the state, a silent key to a kingdom I would never be a part of. From the moment I met them, I knew I was a problem to be managed, a slightly embarrassing piece of my son's past that they had to politely tolerate. At their wedding, a lavish, week-long affair that cost more than my house and my life savings combined, Jessica's mother, Patricia, introduced me to a state senator not as Carol Peterson, my son's mother, but as Michael's mother from out of town. The words hung in the air, dismissing my name, my identity, my entire life, reducing me to a geographical inconvenience they were forced to acknowledge. After the wedding, our calls with Michael became shorter, more strained. He was always so busy, swamped at the hospital, exhausted. I knew it was Jessica, subtly, masterfully creating distance. She was building a wall between his new life of country clubs and charity galas and his old one of secondhand furniture and my homemade casseroles. The few times I was invited for holidays, I felt like a museum piece. I was seated at the far end of the long, polished dining table, a silent guest listening to conversations that felt like they were in a foreign language. Stock portfolios, European ski trips, vineyard acquisitions, and the politics of getting your child into the right preschool. It was a world built on a foundation of money, and I was standing on shifting sand. So when Michael called 3 months before that fateful Christmas party, his voice had a strange, nervous energy that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Mom," he started, the hesitation thick, "the family is having their annual Christmas party at the Aspen house. And, well, Grandma Evelyn specifically asked for you to be there." Evelyn, the matriarch. A woman I'd only ever seen from a distance, always elegant, always remote, always silent. The invitation felt less like a welcome and more like a summons, a royal decree. A knot of pure dread tightened in my stomach. Why now? After 3 years of being kept at arm's length, what had changed? But a mother's hope, as stubborn and foolish as it is, can make you do things that go against your better judgment. My first foolish act was believing for one fleeting moment that this invitation was a genuine gesture of inclusion. My second was pouring my heart and a significant chunk of my carefully managed savings into preparing for it. In my mind, this wasn't just a party, it was an audition. It was my final, desperate chance to prove to them, and maybe to myself, that I wasn't the simple-minded country mouse they thought I was. The quest for the perfect dress became an obsession. I spent a week scouring every consignment shop and outlet store within a 50-mile radius. I was looking for a miracle, something that looked like $1,000 but cost less than $100. And then, in a dusty corner of a high-end secondhand boutique, I found it. It was a dress the color of a midnight sky, a deep, rich blue velvet that felt like liquid silk under my fingers.
The cut was simple, timeless, and elegant. It was marked down 3 times, a forgotten gem from a winter collection past. When I tried it on in the cramped dressing room, I saw a woman I hadn't seen in the mirror for a very long time. She looked graceful. She looked confident. She looked like she might actually belong in a room with the Prescotts. A week before the party, Michael and Jessica made a surprise visit. This was highly unusual. Their visits were normally scheduled weeks in advance, brief and formal. My internal alarm bells, the ones honed by 40 years of nursing, started ringing faintly. Jessica was a whirlwind of synthetic charm and compliments. "Oh, Carol, you look wonderful. Retirement suits you. So healthy," she said, her tone implying my normal state was hovering near death's door. Then her eyes landed on the dress, which I had hung carefully in my closet door, letting the velvet breathe. "Is that what you're wearing to the party? It's absolutely gorgeous." Her praise felt too sweet, too effusive, like cheap perfume. She glided over to admire it, holding a glass of dark red wine she'd insisted on pouring for us from a bottle she'd brought. "The color is just stunning on you," she cooed, running a perfectly manicured, blood-red fingernail along the velvet sleeve. And then it happened. A little oops, a theatrical gasp of surprise that wasn't surprising at all, and the entire glass of Cabernet tipped over, cascading in a sickening dark wave down the entire front of my beautiful, perfect blue dress. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy," she cried out, dabbing furiously at the massive, spreading stain with a napkin, an action that only served to grind the red wine deeper into the delicate fibers. Her eyes, however, showed no apology. For a split second, I saw it, a flicker of cold, calculated triumph. Michael rushed to help, his face a mask of frantic apologies for his wife's accident, but I knew. In that moment, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, I knew that it was no accident. She had seen the one thing that might give me a sliver of confidence, a shield of elegance, a chance to fit in, and she had deliberately and methodically destroyed it. She made a great show of offering to pay for dry cleaning, a hollow, meaningless gesture that she knew was useless against such a stain. My chance was gone. I was left with my old backup, a simple, dark green wool dress. It was respectable, warm, and utterly plain. It was the dress of a retired nurse from a small town. It was exactly what she wanted me to be. As they left, Jessica gave me a tight, cold hug, whispering in my ear, "Don't worry, Carol, it's what's on the inside that counts, right?" The hypocrisy was so sharp, so venomous, it almost took my breath away. And I knew the party wasn't an invitation. It was a setup. The day of the party, the Colorado sky, which had been a brilliant, crisp blue for weeks, turned a bruised, angry gray. The weather forecast had warned of a significant winter weather event, but that was a polite, clinical understatement. By noon, it was a full-blown blizzard, a swirling vortex of white that seemed to determine to erase the world. The wind howled around the corners of my small house like a wounded animal, and the snow came down not in flakes, but in thick, heavy curtains that blotted out the sun. My old car, a reliable 2010 Subaru that my husband Frank had loved and meticulously maintained, felt like a small, vulnerable boat about to be cast into a raging sea. Every sensible part of my brain, the part that had spent a lifetime making prudent, careful decisions, screamed at me to turn back, to stay home, safe and warm with a cup of tea and a good book, to let the Prescotts have their perfect party without my messy presence. But I couldn't. Not after what Jessica had done with the wine. Her little act of sabotage hadn't broken my spirit, it had ignited it. It had stoked a fire of defiance in me that I thought had long burned out. Turning back now would be letting her win. It would be a silent admission that I was exactly who she thought I was: weak, easily intimidated, and ultimately not worthy. Pride is a powerful and sometimes foolish fuel, and mine was burning hot enough to melt a glacier that day. I told myself I was going for Michael, to show him I wouldn't be pushed out of his life. But if I was being honest, I was going for me too. I was going to walk into that house with my head held high in my plain wool dress, and I was going to endure. I gave myself 4 hours for the 2-hour drive, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white and bloodless. The roads were a treacherous, invisible landscape of glazed ice hidden beneath a thick blanket of fresh powder. It was the worst kind of driving conditions. I saw more than one expensive 4-wheel drive SUV, the kind of vehicle that screams, "I own a mountain," spun out in a ditch, their hazard lights blinking in silent surrender.
But I kept going, my old Subaru plowing steadily forward. I drove slowly, my entire focus narrowed to the few feet of road visible in front of me. I was about 30 minutes from the Prescott estate, on a winding 2-lane mountain road that was notoriously dangerous in the winter, when I saw it. A sleek, black luxury sedan, the kind of car that costs more than I made in 3 years as a nurse, had slid awkwardly into a deep snowbank on the side of the road. Its hazard lights were blinking a feeble, rhythmic plea against the overwhelming white of the storm. I slowed down even more, my heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I saw other cars, big, powerful trucks and SUVs, carefully maneuvering around the stranded vehicle, their drivers' faces set like stone, pretending not to see. They had places to be, important parties to attend. My own internal debate was a frantic, whispered argument. "Keep going, Carol. You're already running disastrously late. Showing up late to a Prescott party is a cardinal sin. Showing up late and looking like you just wrestled a snowplow will be unforgivable." I could just keep driving. I could call 911 on my cell when I got a signal further up the road and report it. That would be the smart thing to do, the sensible thing. But then I saw a silhouette in the driver's seat, an elderly woman, alone. And in my mind, I heard Frank's voice, as clear and steady as if he were sitting in the passenger seat beside me. "Carol," he'd say, in that calm, unwavering way of his, "you don't leave people stranded. Not ever. The world has enough people who look the other way." He was right. Some things are more important than impressing people who are fundamentally determined to look down on you anyway. I flicked on my turn signal, a small, decisive click in the quiet car. My heart simultaneously sank with dread and soared with purpose. I pulled over, knowing with absolute certainty that I was trading any last desperate hope of their approval for a stranger's safety. It was a choice I had to make. The moment I stepped out of the warmth of my car, the wind attacked me. It was a savage physical assault, snatching the air from my lungs and scouring my face with tiny, sharp pellets of ice. It was brutally, dangerously cold. The kind of cold that seeps right into your bones and makes you feel brittle. The snow on the road was already up to my shins, and I felt the icy wetness immediately soak through the leather of my sensible boots and the hem of my only presentable wool dress. With each step toward the black sedan, the wind pushed against me, trying to force me back. I bent my head, pulled my thin coat tighter, and trudged forward, a small, determined figure against the vast, indifferent white of the storm. I tapped gently on the driver's side window. The woman inside, who had been staring blankly at the swirling snow, looked startled, her eyes wide. She was probably in her late 70s, with a face that held a timeless architectural elegance, the kind of bond structure that remains beautiful through every decade. Her hair was a perfect luminous silver, coiffed in a way that suggested a recent and expensive salon visit. Her eyes were a startlingly sharp, intelligent blue. She was wearing a beautiful cream-colored cashmere coat, but despite her composure, she looked utterly, profoundly vulnerable. She rolled the window down just a crack, letting in a blast of frigid air. "Can I help you?"
she asked, her voice calm and steady, a remarkable feat of control given her situation. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being in charge, even when they weren't. "I was just about to ask you the same thing," I shouted, my words almost snatched away by the wind. "My name is Carol. Looks like you're in a bit of a jam here." She explained the situation with that same unshakable composure. The car had slid on a patch of black ice, and the back wheels were now deeply embedded in the frozen snowbank. When she tried to restart it after the jolt, the engine wouldn't turn over. It was completely, stubbornly dead. And of course, she added with a refined frustration, my cell phone has no service up here. It was a fact I had already discovered with my own phone. We were on our own, two women on a deserted mountain road in the middle of a blizzard. "Well, I was a nurse for 40 years, I told her, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. "And my husband, Frank, he taught me a thing or two about cars. He always said a woman should know her way around an engine. Let me take a look." She gave me a look that was a mixture of skepticism and desperate gratitude, and nodded, popping the hood from inside. The wind nearly ripped the heavy hood from my hands as I lifted it. It took me only one look in the dim, snowy light to see the main problem. The jolt from hitting the snowbank had been severe enough to knock one of the heavy battery cables clean off its terminal. It was a simple fix if you had the right tools and weren't in the middle of a blinding snowstorm with your fingers going numb. Luckily, Frank was a man who believed in being prepared. He had insisted I keep a small, comprehensive toolkit in the trunk of my Subaru. "Never know when you'll need it," he'd said. "Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it." I dug it out, my fingers already clumsy and stiff from the cold. As I worked the wrench to re-secure the cable, scraping away a bit of fuzzy green corrosion from the wire brush in the kit, the woman watched me from the relative warmth of her car. I had to take my gloves off for the final delicate tightening of the bolt, and the cold metal of the wrench seared my skin. "Okay," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Try it now." She turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, a weak, protesting cough, and then it roared into life, a beautiful, thunderous sound in the muffled silence of the storm. The relief was so immense it felt like a wave of warmth washing over me. She rolled the window down again, a real, genuine smile spreading across her elegant face this time. I must have been a sight, covered head to toe in snow, my hair a frozen mess, a smudge of black grease on my cheek from a careless wipe of my hand. "You're an angel," she said, her voice filled with sincere wonder. But the real surprise wasn't that I could fix a car. It was who this particular angel had just been sent down from a snowy heaven to save. With the powerful engine humming a steady, reassuring rhythm, a sense of shared victory hung in the frigid air between us. The immediate danger had passed. The woman, looking relieved, got out of her car, pulling her expensive cashmere coat tighter around herself as the wind whipped at it. "She simply cannot thank you enough," she said, her sharp blue eyes studying me with a new and unsettling intensity. It wasn't just gratitude I saw in her gaze. It was assessment. She was taking my measure. She continued, her voice thoughtful. "Not many people would have stopped. In fact, I watched at least a dozen cars go right by, especially not someone who looks like they're dressed for an occasion." I looked down at my simple wool dress, now damp at the hem and sporting a fresh grease stain on the skirt. I let out a short, humorless puff of air that turned to vapor in the cold. "Well, the occasion is probably ruined anyway," I admitted, the bitterness I'd been suppressing rising in my throat. "I'm heading to my son's in-laws' Christmas party. It's supposed to be a very formal affair. I think I just spectacularly failed the dress code." "Nonsense," she said immediately, her tone so firm and absolute it left no room for argument. "Anyone worth their salt, anyone with an ounce of substance, will value your character far more than your clothes. And if they don't," she paused, her eyes locking with mine, "then they aren't people worth knowing in the first place." Her words were a sudden, unexpected balm to my frayed and wounded nerves. They were what a true friend would say. They were exactly what Frank would have said. A lump formed in my throat. I'm sure they'll understand, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I knew they wouldn't. To fill the awkward silence, I added, they're the Prescotts. A flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, a brief, unreadable shadow passed over the woman's elegant features. The Prescotts of Aspen? She asked, her voice carefully, deliberately neutral. That's them, I confirmed with a sigh. My son, Michael, is married to their daughter, Jessica. The woman was silent for a long, pregnant moment. The only sound was the howling of the wind and the steady thrum of her car's engine. She seemed to be processing this information, fitting pieces of a puzzle together in her mind. Then, with a newfound sense of purpose, she reached into her elegant leather handbag that was slung over her shoulder and pulled out a small, heavy, cream-colored card case. Well, she said, a strange new light in her eyes as she extended a single card to me. This is certainly a remarkable coincidence. I took the card with my numb, trembling fingers. The paper was thick and expensive, with a texture like linen. On it, in simple, elegant script, was a single name: Evelyn Prescott. My blood ran cold, colder than the blizzard raging around me. My breath caught in my chest. I looked up from the card, into those same sharp, assessing blue eyes. The same eyes as Jessica, but where Jessica's were cold and hard like chips of ice, this woman's held a depth and intelligence that was both intimidating and intriguing. It was her, the matriarch, the remote, untouchable queen of the Prescott dynasty, the one who had supposedly requested my presence. You're, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, a pathetic little squeak. You're Evelyn? I am, she said, and a small, knowing, and profoundly mysterious smile played on her lips. And you must be Carol Peterson. I've been wanting to meet the woman who raised such a fine young man for a very, very long time. She paused, her gaze taking in every detail of my shocked expression, my ruined dress, my grease-stained hands, my wind-chapped face. And in her eyes I saw not disgust, but something that looked unnervingly like approval. "Shall we go to this party together?" she asked, her voice laced with an irony that was as sharp as the cold. I have a distinct feeling it's about to get much more interesting. Driving up the long, winding, perfectly plowed driveway to the Prescott estate, following the taillights of Evelyn's black sedan, felt utterly surreal. My mind was a frantic whirlwind of confusion and dread. For 3 long years, I had been a ghost in this family's life, a problem to be minimized. I had worried endlessly about making the right impression, saying the right thing, wearing the right dress. And now I was about to make my grand entrance at their most important social event of the year as a disheveled roadside mechanic in a shabby stained dress. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The house, a massive log and stone chalet that looked more like a luxury hotel, was blazing with light. It rose from the snowy landscape like a fairy tale castle, every peak and window outlined in warm, golden Christmas lights. Valets in smart red jackets and fur hats rushed to open Evelyn's door as she pulled under the grand, timber-framed portico. She got out and spoke to me through my open window. "I need to have a quick word with my household staff in the back," she said, her voice calm. "You go on in through the main entrance. Don't worry," she added, seeing the panic in my face. "I'll be right behind you." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they weren't. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pushed open the heavy oak doors of my own car, and walked toward the entrance. The wave of warmth and noise that hit me as I stepped inside was overwhelming. The air smelled of money, a mixture of fresh pine from the 20-foot Christmas tree that towered in the grand foyer, expensive perfume, and the faint, delicious scent of roasting duck. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi softly in the corner. Dozens of beautifully dressed people were laughing, their voices a low, confident murmur, holding champagne flutes that sparkled under the light of an antler chandelier the size of a small boat. I felt like a stray wet dog that had wandered into the Westminster Dog Show. I was so profoundly out of place that my very presence felt like a disruption. And then, across the sea of silk and cashmere, I saw Jessica. Her smile, which had been bright and social, froze on her face. Her eyes scanned my appearance, from my wet boots to my messy hair, and the look that crossed her face was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. She excused herself from her conversation and glided across the marble floor towards me, her silk dress rustling like angry whispers. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. This was when she delivered the line that was meant to be the final, killing blow. "We'd prefer if you left." Before the full weight of her cruelty could even land, another voice, high and piercing like shattering glass, joined the attack. "Jessica, darling, who is this?" A younger woman, draped in a truly staggering diamond necklace, sashayed over to us. This had to be Tiffany, Jessica's best friend, the one whose exploits on yachts and private jets filled Jessica's rare, condescending phone calls. Tiffany looked me up and down, her lip curled, as if I was something she had found on the bottom of her $1,000 shoe. "Did the help get lost on the way to the kitchen?" she asked, her voice dripping with a venomous, practiced sweetness. A few people nearby heard her and snickered. The sound was like a physical slap in the face. The humiliation was no longer a private affair. It was a public execution. I looked desperately for Michael, for my son. I saw him standing frozen a few feet away, his face a mask of pale, impotent misery. He looked at me, then at his wife, then at the floor, at his expensive shoes, anywhere but at me. He said nothing. He did nothing. In his devastating silence, my heart, which had been fluttering with anxiety, felt like it broke into a million tiny, icy pieces. I had been judged, condemned, and, by my own son, abandoned.
I have to pause here for a second. Reliving this part, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it, still makes my stomach clench. It's one thing to be disliked, but it's another to be publicly humiliated while your own child stands by and watches. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stood your ground and caused a scene? Or would you have just turned and walked out into that storm? Dignity be damned. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about the strength of others. Hot, shameful tears pricked at the back of my eyes. I blinked them back furiously. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. In that terrible, suspended moment, I saw two paths laid out before me. I could dissolve into a puddle of helpless humiliation right there on their polished marble floor, proving them right about me. Or I could salvage the last, tattered shred of my dignity, turn around, and walk out of that house and out of their lives forever. I chose the latter. I gave Jessica a tight, painful nod, unable to force a single word past the enormous lump that had formed in my throat. I turned my back on them, on my silent son, on the entire glittering, hostile crowd. My wet boots squeaked pathetically on the floor, an absurd soundtrack to my utter mortification. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to be back in the quiet solitude of my car, to be back home in my worn-out armchair, to be anywhere but there. I had taken 2 steps toward the massive oak doors, 2 steps toward freedom from this gilded cage, when a voice, as clear and commanding as a struck bell, sliced through the tense, voyeuristic silence of the foyer. "That is enough." The voice came from the top of the grand sweeping staircase. Every single head in the room, including mine, swiveled in unison. There stood Evelyn Prescott. She hadn't changed her clothes. She was still in her elegant, cream-colored cashmere coat, a bit of snow still melting on the shoulders. She didn't need a gown. She wore an aura of absolute authority that was more intimidating and more impressive than any designer creation. The room, which had been buzzing with malicious whispers and muffled snickers, fell utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a crystal ornament drop from the 20-foot tree. Jessica and Tiffany froze in their triumphant tableau, their smug expressions wiped clean from their faces as if by an invisible hand. Evelyn descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, each step measured and purposeful. Her eyes were not on me. They were fixed, like a hawk's, on her granddaughter and her granddaughter's friend.
She moved with the unhurried, regal grace of someone who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that they own the room, the house, and every single person in it. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of a suddenly terrified-looking Tiffany. "The help you're referring to, Tiffany," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously, deceptively quiet, "just spent the last hour on her knees in a full-blown blizzard, in the freezing dark, saving my life. While you were in here, safe and warm, sipping my champagne and making cruel jokes." Tiffany's expertly tanned face went from pale to a ghostly, sickly white. She looked like she might be sick. Evelyn then turned her icy, devastating gaze to her granddaughter. "And you, Jessica? You were about to turn away the one person who has shown more courage, more compassion, and more basic human decency tonight than anyone else in this entire house." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking with lethal precision. Then she did something that sent a palpable shockwave through the room. She walked right past them, came to my side, took my arm, and tucked it securely into the crook of her own. She turned to face the stunned, silent crowd, a queen with her unlikely consort. "Carol Peterson," she announced, her voice ringing with indisputable, ironclad authority, "is my guest of honor tonight. If anyone has a problem with that, the door is right over there." She didn't gesture. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly where it was. The silence that followed Evelyn's declaration was a new and different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of a crowd watching a public shaming. It was the stunned, fearful silence of a royal court that had just witnessed a swift and brutal changing of the guard. The power in the room had just been completely rewired. People who had been sneering at me from across the room moments ago were now suddenly avoiding my gaze, developing a deep and sudden fascination with their champagne glasses, their shoes, the intricate patterns on the Persian rug. Their judgment hadn't vanished. It had simply been replaced by fear of being on the wrong side of Evelyn Prescott. Evelyn, still holding my arm in a grip that was both comforting and firm, guided me toward the main drawing room. The crowd parted before us like the Red Sea parting for Moses. She led me to a plush, oversized armchair near the roaring fireplace, the best seat in the house. The warmth from the fire felt heavenly on my chilled skin. She motioned for a waiter, who practically sprinted over. "Bring my guest a cup of hot tea with honey and lemon, immediately." The waiter nodded, wide-eyed, and scurried away. "Now then, Carol," Evelyn said, her voice now carrying a lighter, more conversational tone, but still loud enough for the cluster of guests nearby to hear every word. "I believe these people deserve to know exactly what a hero you were tonight. Don't be shy." I felt my cheeks flushed with a new kind of heat, not from shame, but from the sudden, intense focus. But Evelyn's calm, steady presence beside me was like a rock. It gave me the strength to speak. So I told them. In a quiet, clear voice, I told them about the long drives, the worsening blizzard, the terrifying moment of seeing the black car spun out in the snowbank. I described finding the loose battery cable, a detail that made a few of the men in the room, titans of industry and finance, who probably hadn't looked under the hood of a car in decades, lean in, listening with a new, genuine interest. The terminal was a bit corroded, I explained, feeling more confident as I spoke. The connection wasn't clean, so it was tough to get the engine to turn over at first. Evelyn, like a skilled conductor, prompted me with her next line. "And what did you do about that, my dear? You didn't have any fancy tools, did you?" "Well, no," I said, feeling a bit foolish now in this opulent setting. "I didn't have a proper terminal cleaner, so I just used an old trick my late husband Frank taught me. He was a mechanic in his younger days. I used a little bit of Coca-Cola I found in her car to clean it off. The phosphoric acid in it eats right through the corrosion." A murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. A woman wearing a staggering emerald necklace, a piece that probably could have funded my retirement for a decade, actually giggled. But it wasn't a mocking sound this time. It was a giggle of genuine surprise and delight. Evelyn smiled, a slow, deeply satisfied smile. She picked up the word and held it up for all to see. "Coca-Cola," she repeated, savoring it. "Practical, resourceful, ingenious. not afraid to get her hands dirty to solve a problem with whatever is on hand. She then looked directly across the room at her son, Robert Prescott, the polished and detached CEO of the family empire, who was standing stiffly by the mantelpiece, looking deeply uncomfortable. "That," she said, her voice ringing with profound meaning, "is the spirit that built this country, the very spirit that built Prescott Enterprises. It seems somewhere along the way, some of us," and her eyes bored into her son, "have forgotten that." Robert's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The power in the room had shifted completely. I was no longer the poor, embarrassing relative. I was the hero of a story that was making the most powerful people in the room feel small. And I had a distinct and terrifying feeling that the night and Evelyn were far from over. After another hour of the most surreal conversations of my life, where people who'd previously looked through me were now asking for details about engine corrosion, Evelyn stood up with a decisive grace. "Robert, Jessica, Michael," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Carol, please join me in the library for a moment." Her tone was pleasant, but it was not a request. It was a summons. The library was like something out of a historical film. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves were filled with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been opened. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, wood smoke from the smoldering fire, and decades of unspoken family secrets. Stern-faced Prescott ancestors captured in heavy, gilded oil paintings watched out every move with judgmental eyes. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind us, the festive pretense of the party vanished completely. This was not a social space. This was a boardroom. Or perhaps, more accurately, a courtroom. Evelyn didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight to the point, turning her attention to her son Robert, who looked like a man facing a firing squad. "I have been reviewing the quarterly reports for the company," she began, her voice as calm and level as a frozen lake. "And I've been doing some of my own research. Profits are up. Superficially, congratulations. But our charitable giving, as a percentage of our profits, is at an all-time low. Our employee turnover rate is the highest it's been in 2 decades. And you, Robert, made the executive decision to close the community outreach program in Denver, the program your father started 40 years ago." Robert, a man used to being the most powerful person in any room, shifted on his expensive Italian leather feet. "Mother, those were difficult but necessary business decisions. The outreach program wasn't profitable. In fact, it was a significant drain on resources." "A drain?" Evelyn's voice was suddenly sharp like the crack of a whip. "That program, Robert, gave college scholarships to underprivileged children. It provided seed money for local entrepreneurs. It was a lifeline for the very community that allowed this family to build its fortune. It was never, ever about profit. It was about responsibility. It was about our soul." She then did something that stunned us all into a deeper silence. She walked over to a large, imposing oil painting above the fireplace. It depicted a handsome, confident man in a suit from the 1970s, the man the world knew as the great Harold Prescott, the visionary founder of the company. Everyone in this state, everyone in the business world thinks this man, my late husband, built Prescott Enterprises from the ground up. He was a wonderful man, a brilliant high school history teacher, a devoted father, and the absolute love of my life. But he couldn't balance a checkbook to save his soul. She turned to face us, her small frame seeming to grow in stature, her blue eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen before. "I built this company," she stated, each word a solid, unshakable fact. "I started it in 1968 with a $5,000 loan from my father and a rented, unheated garage in a bad neighborhood in Denver. I worked 18-hour days while you, Robert, were in diapers. I negotiated every contract. I fought off bankers and suppliers and competitors who told me to go home and bake cookies because a woman couldn't possibly run a manufacturing business. I built this entire empire brick by painful, bloody brick." Jessica looked like she might actually faint. Michael stared, his mouth hanging open. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of family history. This was a complete and utter rewriting of the Prescott legacy, a foundational myth that their entire identity was built upon. The solid ground beneath all of our feet had just cracked wide open, revealing a chasm of secrets and lies. The silence that filled the library was absolute, so thick and heavy it felt hard to breathe. It was weighted with the gravity of a 50-year-old secret finally brought into the light. I stared at Evelyn, this elegant, poised woman in her late 70s, and tried to reconcile that image with the one she had just painted. A young, determined firebrand in a cold garage, building a future that no one but her could see. The sheer grit and resilience it must have taken were almost unimaginable. The Prescott fortune wasn't just inherited. It was forged in the fire of one woman's unbreakable will. Jessica looked like she might actually faint. Michael stared, his mouth hanging open. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of family history. This was a complete and utter rewriting of the Prescott legacy, a foundational myth that their entire identity was built upon. The solid ground beneath all of our feet had just cracked wide open, revealing a chasm of secrets and lies. The silence that filled the library was absolute, so thick and heavy it felt hard to breathe. It was weighted with the gravity of a 50-year-old secret finally brought into the light. I stared at Evelyn, this elegant, poised woman in her late 70s, and tried to reconcile that image with the one she had just painted. A young, determined firebrand in a cold garage, building a future that no one but her could see. The sheer grit and resilience it must have taken were almost unimaginable. The Prescott fortune wasn't just inherited. It was forged in the fire of one woman's unbreakable will. Jessica was the first to find her voice, though it was weak and trembling, a pale imitation of her usual confident tone. "Grandmother, we had no idea." "Don't lie to me, Jessica." Evelyn cut her off, her voice suddenly devoid of any warmth, as cold and hard as granite. "Don't you dare lie to me. Your father knew. He spent his entire life coasting on my achievements while pretending they were his father's. And you," she took a step closer to her granddaughter, "you have spent 3 years reveling in the privilege and status this company afforded you, while actively trying to push away and humiliate the one person in this family who actually embodies the values I built it on." Her gaze fell on me, and for the first time it was filled with a fierce, almost startling protective warmth. "You are obsessed with appearances, Jessica," Evelyn continued, her focus now lasered in on her granddaughter like a prosecuting attorney. "You were horrified by Carol's dress tonight. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the real ugliness in this room." "Oh no," I thought, my stomach clenching in a fresh wave of dread. "Please don't." I didn't want to be the weapon she used against her own family. But Evelyn was relentless. "Carol," she said, her voice softening slightly as she turned to address me, making it clear this was not an accusation but a request for testimony. "Tell me about your dress. It's a lovely color, but I recall Michael mentioning on the phone that you'd bought a special new one for this evening."
My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Michael, who now looked utterly, painfully confused. I looked at Jessica, whose face had gone a stark, chalky white. She knew what was coming. I didn't want to be the one to detonate this bomb in the middle of their family, but the encouraging, insistent look in Evelyn's eyes told me that the truth, however painful, needed to be heard. So, in a quiet, steady voice that betrayed none of the turmoil I was feeling inside, I told them. I told them about my joy at finding the beautiful blue velvet dress. I told them about Jessica's surprise visit. I told them, in simple, factual terms, about the accidental red wine spill that had so perfectly and completely ruined it. As I spoke, I watched my son's face. It was a slow, agonizing transformation. His initial confusion gave way to dawning comprehension, which then curdled into pure, unadulterated horror and disbelief. He turned to his wife, his voice a choked, broken whisper. "Jess, did you... Please tell me you didn't do that. Please." Jessica couldn't meet his eyes. She couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She just stared at the floor, at her perfect, expensive shoes, her guilt radiating off her in palpable waves.
In that moment, the pristine, perfect facade of their marriage, the one they presented to the world, cracked, revealing the ugly, rotten truth that lay just beneath the surface. Evelyn simply nodded, as if I had just confirmed her deepest and most cynical suspicions. "There it is," she said softly, more to herself than to the rest of us. "The real ugliness in this room has nothing to do with a little snow and grease." Thank you so much for sticking with me through this part of the story. I know it's heavy and it's hard to relive, but it's so important to what happens next. If you're still here with me on this journey, do me a favor and just comment the number 1 below so I know you're still with me. It means more than you know. With the ugly truth about the dress hanging in the air like a toxic fog, the room fell into another heavy, suffocating silence. Robert looked absolutely furious, not at his daughter for her cruelty, but at the sheer messiness of the exposure. His perfect family image had been shattered. Jessica was visibly trembling now, a cornered animal with nowhere to run. And Michael, my son, looked utterly broken, as if the foundations of his life had just crumbled into dust. I half expected Evelyn to deliver some final crushing blow, to disown Jessica, to fire her son from the company, to do something dramatic and final to purge the poison. But Evelyn was far more strategic and far more interesting than that. Her next move wasn't about vengeance. It was about redemption. But she wasn't going to just hand me a reward on a silver platter. That wasn't her way. "Carol," she said, her voice shifting, becoming crisp and businesslike, pulling the room's focus away from the family drama and towards a new purpose. "What you did for me tonight on the side of that frozen road, it wasn't just simple kindness. It was resourceful. It was grace under pressure. It was problem solving with the tools you had. In my world, that's called leadership." She walked over to the massive mahogany desk that dominated one end of the library, running her hand over the polished wood. "For the past 5 years, under Robert's leadership," she said with a pointed look at her son, "the Prescott Foundation has become a ghost of what it was. It writes large checks to fancy museums for tax purposes. It puts our name on the wings of hospitals. It has no soul. It has become a hollow PR tool, a way for us to feel good about ourselves without actually doing any good." Robert started to protest, his voice strained. "Mother, our philanthropic profile is considered exemplary. Our profile is excellent. Our impact is negligible. We've lost touch with the real world, Robert. We sit in this tower of glass and steel in Denver, and we have forgotten that our first and most important responsibility is to the communities that allowed us to prosper in the first place." Then she turned her full, undivided attention to me. She said plainly, her gaze direct and challenging, "I'm not going to just hand you a job. That's not my style, and I suspect it's not yours either. I offer opportunities, and I believe you, Carol, are a unique opportunity for this family and this company to find its way back to what matters." My head was spinning. What was she proposing? "The community outreach program in Denver, the one Robert so efficiently closed to improve the bottom line. I want to revive it. But I don't want to just throw money at it from on high. I want to do it right. I want to understand what that community actually needs today, not what a board of directors in a skyscraper thinks it needs." And then came the offer laid out not as a gift, but as a gauntlet thrown down. "I want to hire you for a 1-month paid consulting project. I will pay you $15,000 for your time and expertise. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go back to Denver, immerse yourself in that old neighborhood where our company was born, and come back to me with a real plan, built from the ground up, based on the real needs of the people there. A plan that will make a tangible, lasting difference. Show me what you can do, Carol. Show my family what real value, the kind you can't measure on a balance sheet, truly looks like." It wasn't a handout. It wasn't a reward for saving her. It was a challenge. It was a test. And every fiber of my being, every bit of the nurse, the mother, the woman I was, screamed at me that I had to take it. $15,000. The number hung in the air, seeming both impossibly large and completely irrelevant at the same time. This wasn't about the money. I knew it, and more importantly, Evelyn knew it. To her, that amount was a rounding error. To me, it was a staggering sum, but it paled in comparison to what she was truly offering. This was about something far more valuable, something I hadn't realized I've been starving for. A chance. A chance to prove my worth, not to them, but to myself. A chance to do meaningful, tangible work again. A chance to show my son and his wife and her entire insulated family who Carol Peterson really was when she wasn't being shoved into the corner of their perfect lives. I let my gaze travel around the room, a silent survey of the emotional wreckage. I looked across the library at Michael. The broken, helpless look on his face had been replaced with something else, something I hadn't seen directed at me in years, a look of pure, unadulterated awe and pride. He met my gaze, and for the first time all night, he didn't look away. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of encouragement that shouted louder than any words. In that moment, I felt him seeing me again, not as an obligation, not as his embarrassing mother, but as his mom. The capable, strong, no-nonsense woman who had raised him, who had taught him right from wrong, even if he'd forgotten for a little while.
Then my eyes drifted to Jessica. She was staring at me, her beautiful face a toxic cocktail of shock, resentment, and utter disbelief. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. In her world, opportunities and power were inherited, or they were given based on pedigree, on connections, on what Ivy League school you went to. They weren't earned on the side of a snowy road by a 64-year-old retired nurse in a stained wool dress. My sudden elevation was a direct refutation of everything her world was built on, and she couldn't stand it. Looking at her then, I felt a strange and unexpected wave of pity wash over me. Her entire life was a gilded cage, built on a foundation of superficiality, and she didn't even know she was a prisoner. Finally, I looked back at Evelyn. She stood, waiting, a silent statue of patience and power, her blue eyes watching me, assessing me one last time. She had thrown down the gauntlet. Now she was waiting to see if I had the courage to pick it up. She wasn't just offering me a project. She was offering me a lifeline back to a version of myself I thought had disappeared with Frank's passing. The woman who wasn't afraid of a challenge, the nurse who could take charge in a crisis, the wife who could learn to fix a car engine because her husband believed she could do anything. I took a deep breath. The air in that stuffy, expensive library suddenly felt fresh and full of possibility. I felt my posture change, my shoulders straightening, my chin lifting. "Evelyn," I said, my voice clear and steady, with none of the trembling I'd felt in the foyer just hours before. "I accept your offer." 3 simple words, but they were the 3 most powerful words I had spoken in years. It wasn't just an acceptance of a business contract, it was an acceptance of myself. It was the closing of a long, painful chapter and the turning of a page to a new, unwritten one. It was the beginning of the rest of my life. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer a laser beam aimed at me. It was now the heavy, uncomfortable weight of a family that had been forced to look in the mirror and was just beginning to grapple with the ugly reflection staring back. And as for me, I couldn't wait to get to Denver and get my hands dirty again. That next month was a whirlwind, one of the most challenging, exhausting, and invigorating periods of my entire life. I left the opulent prison of Aspen the very next morning, leaving Michael and Jessica to navigate the silent, frozen wreckage of their own making. I didn't need to be there for that. My focus was forward. I drove to Denver, and instead of staying in a fancy hotel paid for by the Prescotts, I used some of my own savings to rent a small, simple furnished apartment in the Five Points neighborhood. It was the very place where Evelyn, all those years ago, had started her company in a cold, rented garage. The neighborhood was a vibrant, complex tapestry of history, culture, and struggle. It had a rich, proud past, but it had faced its share of economic hardship and neglect. It was a world away from the pristine, manicured glamour of Aspen. It was real, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. I knew I couldn't walk in there as a consultant from Prescott Enterprises. That name probably meant nothing but gentrification and corporate indifference to the people who lived here. So I went in simply as Carol, a retired nurse, new to the neighborhood, who wanted to listen. I spent my days talking to people, not interviewing them with a clipboard and a list of questions, but listening, really listening. I volunteered at the local community center, helping serve meals and sort donations. I had coffee with small business owners who were struggling to keep their doors open. I sat on park benches with pastors, teachers, and single mothers who were working 3 jobs to keep their families afloat. I listened to their stories, their frustrations, their hopes for their children, their dreams for their community, and their deep-seated weariness with a system that so often overlooked them. I learned that what they needed wasn't another performative check with the Prescott name on it for a new basketball court that would look good in a press release. They needed practical, sustainable, grassroots support. The kids, bright and hungry for opportunity, needed after-school programs that taught them real-world skills that college wasn't providing, like coding, graphic design, or financial literacy. The small business owners, the lifeblood of the neighborhood, needed access to microloans and mentorship from people who had navigated the treacherous waters of entrepreneurship. The community as a whole needed a hub, a place where people could connect, learn new skills, access resources, and feel a sense of ownership and pride over their own future. I spent my evenings in that little apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, surrounded by notebooks filled with stories and ideas. My report, when I started writing it, wasn't filled with corporate jargon or complex financial projections. It was filled with people. The story of Maria, a single mom with an incredible talent for baking who wanted to start a catering business but couldn't get a $5,000 loan from a bank. The story of Jamal, a quiet, brilliant teenager who could take apart and rebuild a computer in an hour, but was failing his classes because he was so profoundly bored and unchallenged. The story of Mr. Henderson, a man who had lived on the same block for 60 years and just wanted to see the next generation have a fighting chance. My plan wasn't just about giving away money, it was about investing in human potential. It was about creating partnerships, not just charities. It was everything the Prescott Foundation had stopped being. As the month drew to a close, I felt a nervous, electric excitement. I had a plan I believed in, a plan built on the voices of the people. Now I just had to convince a boardroom full of executives who had long since forgotten what it was like to listen. The day of the presentation, I walked into the shimmering lobby of the Prescott Enterprises headquarters in downtown Denver. It was a skyscraper of smoked glass and polished steel, a silent, imposing monument to corporate power that seemed to touch the clouds. I was wearing a simple, professional navy blue suit I'd found at that same consignment shop where I'd bought the velvet dress. But this time, as I looked at my reflection in the polished marble walls, I felt no insecurity. I felt a quiet, steady strength. I wasn't there to ask for their approval or to try to fit in. I was there to speak truth to power, to be an advocate, to tell them what they needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear.
I didn't use the flashy PowerPoint presentation that a young, helpful assistant had prepared for me. I left the projector off. I wanted them to look at me, to see the conviction in my eyes. I just stood at the front of the room and spoke from the heart. I told them the stories I had heard. I told them about Maria and her dream of a catering business. I told them about Jamal and his untapped potential. I told them about Mr. Henderson and his quiet dignity. I put faces and names to the abstract concept of community outreach. I showed them pictures I had taken on my own phone of the community center's crumbling plaster,
the struggling storefronts with hopeful, open signs, and the bright, intelligent, hopeful faces of the kids I'd met. I could see the skepticism on some of the younger executives' faces. They were fidgeting, checking their phones under the table. They were used to seeing return on investment charts and market analysis, not stories about single mothers and bored teenagers. But I also saw something else. I saw a flicker of interest, of memory in the eyes of some of the older board members, men who had been with the company for decades. I was reminding them of something they had long since forgotten, of a time when the company was smaller, hungrier, and more connected to the world outside its own walls. I laid out my proposal with clarity and passion, a multifaceted, community-led initiative. First, a mentorship program pairing Prescott executives with local small business owners, forcing them to get out of this tower and back on the ground. Second, a state-of-the-art tech and skills training center for teenagers to be run in partnership with the local high school, giving kids like Jamal a real, viable path to a future. And third, a microloan fund to be administered not by bankers, but by a board of community leaders to help people like Maria get their dreams off the ground. This isn't charity, I concluded, my eyes locking with Robert's down the long table. This is an investment in the community that gave you your start, an investment in your own legacy, a chance to be more than just profitable. When I finished, the room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Robert looked down at his papers, his jaw tight. I braced myself for the polite dismissal, for a condescending, "Thank you, we'll take it under advisement." But then, a sound broke the silence. It was the sharp, distinct sound of one person clapping. Slowly, deliberately, powerfully. It was Evelyn. She rose to her feet. "That," she said, her voice filled with a powerful, unfamiliar emotion, "is the best, most important proposal I have heard in this room in 20 years. One by one, hesitantly at first, then with more conviction, the other older board members started to clap too. Robert, cornered, had no choice but to join in, the applause sounding hollow from his end of the table. Evelyn walked to my side at the front of the room and faced the board. "The board approves this plan, effective immediately. And it will be a new, independent division of the foundation. We will call it the Peterson Initiative, and its new, founding executive director is you, Carol, if you'll have us." The true reward wasn't the title, or the office, or the generous salary she offered me later. It was that moment. The moment I realized I hadn't just found a job. I had found my voice. I had found my purpose. So here I am, 2 years later, sitting in my office at the Peterson Initiative headquarters, which we established not in a downtown skyscraper, but in a beautifully renovated historic building right in the heart of the Five Points neighborhood. The initiative is thriving beyond my wildest dreams. We've helped launch 17 new small businesses, including Maria's Kitchen, which now caters events all over the city. Our tech center has a permanent waiting list, and 2 of our first graduates, including a confident young man named Jamal, just received full-ride scholarships to the Colorado School of Mines. The change in the community is palpable, a renewed sense of hope, of possibility, of pride. My own life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Michael and I have rebuilt our relationship from the ground up on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. He started volunteering as a mentor at our tech center, and seeing him connect with those kids, seeing that kind, compassionate boy I raised emerge from behind the shadow of his marriage, has been the greatest gift of all. As for Jessica, well, some people don't change. Their marriage is strained, a fragile, hollow thing. I know Michael is struggling with difficult choices. That's their path to walk now. I find that I hold no anger for her anymore, only a kind of distant sadness for a life lived in such a small, gilded cage. I never did wear that blue velvet dress. It's still in my closet, professionally restored by a fabric specialist Evelyn insisted on hiring, a gift from her. Sometimes I look at it, and I don't see a reminder of cruelty or humiliation anymore. I see a turning point, a catalyst. But more often I think about that old plain green wool dress. It's hanging there too, clean now, a quiet and unassuming witness to the most important night of my life. It's a symbol, a reminder to me that our true worth is never, ever determined by the clothes we wear, the car we drive, or the balance in our bank account.
It's measured by our character. It's measured by our willingness to stop in a storm, to get our hands dirty, to help a stranger with no thought of reward. It's measured by the good we do in the world when no one is watching. That Christmas party felt like a devastating ending, but it really was a profound and unexpected beginning. And it all started with a simple choice to show a little kindness on a cold, dark, and lonely road. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me that you've shared this journey. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment in your life where a small act of kindness, either one you gave or one you received, led to something unexpectedly wonderful and life-changing? Please share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and I truly believe that our stories of compassion and connection are what heal the world. Your voice matters. Thank you again, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the incredible, resilient power of the human heart.